Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the David Glenn Show, now seen and heard exclusively here on the North Carolina Sports Network. It's another special year in the sports world here in the bold North State, as Mike Waddell likes to call it. And that includes the second year in a row in which we get to host one of golf's four major championships. In 2024, it was the U.S. Open, our national championship at Pinehurst number 2, ultimately won by Bryson DeChambeau. Here in 2025, it is the PGA Championship, which will be held May 15th through 18th at Quail Hollow Golf Club in Charlotte. Our guest today grew up very close to Hillendale Golf Course in Durham, North Carolina, fell in love with the sport, became a competitive amateur golfer himself long ago, and has been an outstanding author and writer on fascinating golf and other topics ever since, including for about a decade as the sports editor of the Augusta Chronicle newspaper right there in Augusta, Georgia, which of course is home to one of the most famous golf courses in the world, Augusta National, and the only major golf championship that does not move from place to place, the Masters. Not long ago, our guest released an updated version of one of his extremely popular golf books, The Legendary Caddies of Augusta National: Inside Stories from Golf's Greatest Stage. Ward Clayton, welcome back to the David Glenn Show, my friend, and thanks for being with us. How are you?
DG, I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks for, I wish we'd had food. You could have brought some barbecue to the table today. I live in Florida. They don't make it like they do there, but that's okay.
Well, it's great to see you always. I am proudly repping my Masters gear for today's interview with you, and I know you have a lifetime worth more experience on those hallowed grounds more than I do. But let's start with a very broad question, because even most of us who love to play golf or even watch the elite golfers on TV or in person may not have as much experience, if any, with caddies. Generally speaking, what are the pro golfers that you've interviewed, whether from back in the day with the legendary caddies you've written about or even through today, how do they describe those relationships and then those caddies' impacts on a professional golf tournament, for example?
I think anytime a guy wins, a caddy's probably done something that's influential toward him during that course of that week, whether it be tampering down some overexcitement or building them up when they're feeling down or giving them some strategical advice, anything of that nature. In a lot of ways, Dave, I think the best thing a caddy can be known for is reading a person's personality. They understand that Dave Glenn is on the first tee, he's a nervous Nelly. He's going to tell you a couple jokes and loosen you up so you play well. Vice versa, if you're really cocky, people from Philadelphia are, which is where you're from.
Yeah.
They're probably gonna tamper that a little bit and make you be more humble. So that's the biggest plus I can think for caddies is they're there to be your psychologist. They're going to make you so you understand what you got in front of you, so you're not getting out of you. You're not thinking two holes ahead. You're at the moment in the course of the day, so you're not thinking, oh, I'm going to win the green jacket here in a couple of holes. They're really trying to keep you in the moment.
A lot of folks don't know that the first Masters tournament, of course, being held in 1934, for decades, every competing golfer was basically forced to choose among the caddies provided there on site by the folks at Augusta National. Why was that the rule for decades? When did that policy eventually change? Why did it change? Because nowadays we do see all these pros bringing their own caddy to Augusta.
That was the original idea because caddies were prevalent in Augusta at next door Augusta Country Club. They learned how to caddy there. And they were predominantly from a black neighborhood that's located right in the center of all that, Dave. There's Augusta Country Club, Augusta National, these historic cemeteries that go back to the Civil War and back to the Revolutionary War days. And then there's Walton Way, which has got these humongous homes. And so this black community sprung up there because these folks could work at some of these houses, at some of these clubs, at some of these businesses as cooks, as maids, as working, in the outside, whatever. And they could walk to these places. Same thing applied to these young kids who were looking to make a buck. they could go next door to Augusta Country Club and learn how to caddy. And when they got to a certain level, they, quote, graduated across Rays Creek to Augusta National. So they developed this expertise about knowing this piece of land, and that carried them forward. I think that they were readily available next door, and I think that's why that happened. Whether they were black or whether they were white, whatever they were, these guys developed this expertise that was unparalleled, I think, of any category you can think of in the world. So that's how they became such a institution there.
As a guy born in the later part of the 1960s, everything I've read about life in America earlier in the 1900s would make my brain scramble at the idea of mostly white professional golfers spending these 4 or so very important hours per day over multiple days plus practice rounds with these, generally speaking, older black men. Like, that just didn't happen in society, and yet it was happening at this prestigious place we call Augusta National. How did the people who were living that, how did they put that dichotomy in perspective in all of your interviews?
I think that the old black caddy corps perspective was, this is a job that we can do, that we've perfected, and we can have a say in what goes on. And now keep in mind, the all black caddy corps, sometimes they were very young. Carl Jackson started caddying the Masters when he's 13. So these guys knew how to read greens, knew the yardage of the golf course, their interaction with the players. They told them jokes, they kept them loose, this kind of stuff. So they had this skill set that allowed them to work there. I think at the same time, a lot of them had difficulty just getting to their workplace, Dave. Whether it be because they were black, they couldn't eat at a certain place, they had difficulty getting somewhere during the civil rights movement, et cetera, like that. But yet they kept their head down and got through a lot of these difficulties to continue that work. The big thing that's always intriguing to me is in 1983, when they decided to open the caddy ranks. You think to yourself, oh, they're going to open the caddy ranks and have all kind of people caddying there. That may have been true, but it cut off a lot of these guys. It's all black workforce, mainly from Augusta, so they didn't have that same opportunity. So it's a little bit of a interesting change of pace where you go from an all black caddy corps to them not having the opportunity. That's sort of an interesting dynamic about how and why that happened.
So does that mean when Ben Crenshaw, a great golfer, but if I remember correctly, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Ben Crenshaw's only 2 majors were the 2 Masters that he won. Does that mean that he won those 2 in the 80s and 90s under the rules where he could have chosen his personal caddy, but he decided to go with Mr. Carl Jackson, who was by that point, a legendary caddy from Augusta?
They developed a relationship that was friend before caddy. To take it to some further depth, Jack Stevens in the 80s and 90s became the chairman at Augusta National. Carl Jackson worked for him in his business in Arkansas. Stevens Incorporated underwrote the formation, the public sale of Walmart.
Wow.
So quite a accomplished businessman. The gentleman, Warren Stevens, who's now a member of Augusta National, who is Jack Stevens' son, he and Carl are like brothers. Warren Stevens is now the ambassador to the UK under President Trump. So
wow.
It's pretty accomplished. But he and Warren and Carl are like brothers. So the reason is Carl knew that golf course so well, and he interacted with Ben very easily. Carl's a big guy. He's about 6'4", 220 pounds, and Crenshaw's not very big. He's about 5'9", but they had a relationship where they could talk to each other that was particularly close. I know that Stevie Williams, who caddied for Tiger all those years, he had Nike is Tiger's was his club and ball connection. Stevie used to get Carl's shoe size and go to like probably get some Air Jordans that weren't even on the market yet and take them to Augusta and give them to Carl and ask Carl for some insights, some secrets. And Carl would never tell him the story. Carl was always say, "Thanks for the shoes. In a few years, I'll give you some secrets." He wasn't going to let out some of the secrets to a co-competitor.
I love it. Ward Clayton is joining us. Check out, among his many books, The Legendary Caddies of Augusta National, Inside Stories from Golf's Greatest Stage. My understanding is that the Masters official media guide to this day, which is apparently 400 to 500 pages, makes no mention of the legendary local caddies that you have written about in your books and articles and otherwise. Is that part of the reason that you wanted these guys to be remembered? That, and I don't know if are today's caddies mentioned in the Masters official record book. I don't know how that works, but feels like your work has filled a little bit of a gap of history.
Dave, when I was a sports editor in Augusta in the 90s, we would do untold number of historic stories and going through the archives. On occasion, we would find where a caddy was mentioned, but generally just by their nickname. And I said, that's odd, you know.
And there were some great ones.
Yes, the nicknames were fantastic, but I was interested in who was behind the scenes. What's the guy's real name? What did he do for a living, et cetera? And that was probably A, because he was a caddy, which generally wasn't a well thought of occupation then, and B, they were all black. So therefore, the media was telling this story to mostly white audience. They probably thought to themselves, well, they're not going to be interested in that. But yet these guys were so influential toward what was going on. And I'll use, since we're in the Final Fours upcoming here, Duke's assistant coach, Will Avery, who's taken a more prominent role since Jai Lucas has gone to Miami. Yep. Will's an assistant coach at Duke. He's from Augusta, Georgia, played at Duke, went back, got his degree at Duke. Great story about how he's now his assistant coach. His great uncle is Nathaniel Ironman Avery, who caddied for Arnold Palmer. Until Will was in his early 20s, he didn't really understand the depth of what his great uncle had done. So Will, in large part, decided he'd go back to Duke and get his degree because he thought his kids needed to understand that you got to try harder and make it. And I think he was maybe inspired by the fact that his great uncle had achieved something that he wanted to have a similar kind of achievement to another degree other than dribbling and shooting.
Among the many fun stories that I have read through your work and your books is one about how the legendary golfer Arnold Palmer won the Masters a certain year. Somehow his caddy that year received a check for a larger amount than Arnie had received for actually winning the Masters that year. How did that happen? How was it rectified? And I assume everybody got a good laugh afterward, maybe.
1958, Arnold Palmer's first Masters victory. Now, keep in mind, golfers have like an ensemble of swing coaches, chefs, everything like that today. But then they didn't have very much. And Winnie Palmer, Arnold's wife, was like his business partner or whatever. So she would write the check. And so after he wins the Masters, there was a plan that Eisenhower was going to come in on Monday and Palmer was going to play golf with Eisenhower after winning the Masters. So she was sort of flummoxed. And so she wrote a check and added an additional zero to it. So Iron Man's going, oh man, look, I just made, $11,000 or whatever it was. And lo and behold, Augusta National saw the check and they called Mr. Palmer at his celebratory dinner, and said, hey, look, this check just got written and he's getting ready to cash it. We want to make sure this is right. He said, well, it probably shouldn't be that much. So they had to stop the check and reissue a smaller check, even though Iron Man traditionally would take that check and go buy a new car with it. So that was it may not have been very humorous to Iron Man because he lost some cash. But then again, at the same time, he got some notoriety out of the fact that Winnie was sort of befuddled about how much money she should pay the caddy and miswrote the check. So don't we all wish somebody would miswrite us a check? So
there have been occasional controversies even in recent years, whether, in one example, Matt Kuchar tipped his caddy the correct amount where it was a fill-in caddy, etc. I don't want to necessarily get into those details, but is the general rule of thumb, I remember in your Arnold Palmer story, it was something in the neighborhood of 10%, right? Like he was supposed to get a check for maybe 1,400 and it was 14,000 and then they had to backpedal and all that stuff. Do we know, like, has that stayed the same even in this era, roughly the same, where, these guys today, obviously they're making a ton more money and they're supporting those chefs and the rest of the support staff in addition to the caddy. But do we know whether that rule of thumb of 10% still applies?
Generally, yes. A caddy may have a per diem during the course of a week, say a couple $1,000s. And then the rest of it is based upon how the player goes. So, for example, if you win the tournament, you get 10%. If you finish top 10, you might get 7%. If you make the cut, you might get 5%. That kind of standard. It may fluctuate a little bit based upon where you finish. But can you imagine the Players' Championship 3 weeks ago? Rory McIlroy won the tournament. He won $4.3 million. Okay, his caddy wins 10%. So that's a pretty good week.
Well said. King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947. And it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife, Keaton. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and/or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune Restaurant website is neptuneswb.com. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
NC Pork, good for the plate, great for the state.
Ward Clayton joining us on the David Glenn Show. I'm glad you brought up Rory because I can't think about this year's Masters without thinking about Rory. He's almost 36 years old. He, of course, has already won the other three majors. He's had a couple of close calls over the years at Augusta National. But for the first time in his career, I believe he has 2 PGA Tour wins before the month of April. And obviously the Masters is the one and only one he's missing for the Grand Slam or the Career Slam. Is it reasonable to consider him at least one of the favorites this year as we have that storyline lingering? Because I know in golf, you can be the best golfer in the world, and that doesn't mean you're going to win. But it feels like Rory is among those playing the better golf in the world right now.
Well, I think Scheffler and McIlroy are 1 and 2 as far as favorites are concerned. What's interesting about that is that Scheffler's won twice, and both times he won multiple times before the Masters. And this year, Rory's in that place where he's won a couple of times and is playing really well. Even last week when he didn't win, he played pretty well. So I think a lot of it is how free Rory's going to play next week. Is he going to just go out there and play his usual game, or is he going to start thinking to himself, oh, I'm on the cusp of winning the Masters? That's always the problem when you get there to these big tournaments. Are you coming down the stretch and all of a sudden you're getting ahead of yourself? And that's where the caddy's got to come in and say, hey, let's focus on where your feet stand and not 2 holes away. So I think caddying can keep you in the moment, and that's really essential.
Is that Career Slam list still as short as Tiger, Nicklaus, Gary Player, Ben Hogan, Gene Sarazen? I mean, if Rory can somehow just grab one of these Masters, are we talking about him as like a top 10 all-time great if he pulls that off?
You would think he'd be in that neighborhood. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So,
Yeah.
no, he's 36, but I don't look at him that way. I look at him as he's still, he might be playing the best golf he's ever played. Dave, he's always had sort of the penchant for being somebody who hits it as hard as he can off the tee, hits it as hard as he can into the greens. When he won the Players Championship, you may have noted that some of the shorter iron shots he was taking a little bit off and playing a three-quarter shot and so forth like that. And he's never been noted for that. So I think he's finally feels comfortable with playing that way. So I'm interested to see at Augusta if he tries some of these little secondary shots that aren't 100% and takes a little bit off and so forth like that. That'll be interesting to see how he plays there.
Given that you're originally a state of North Carolina guy and played golf here and went to UNC, et cetera, I wonder your thoughts about, and you can flush out this list if you'd like, but the best golfers ever to come from the state of North Carolina, and for all of our viewers and listeners, I'm putting people like Arnold Palmer off to the side. I know he played at Wake Forest, but he's from Pennsylvania is the fair way to put it. But Ray Floyd was raised in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and is a four-time major champion. Webb Simpson, raised in Raleigh, college at Wake Forest, makes his home in Charlotte. Davis Love III, born in Charlotte, college star at UNC. They're, to me, North Carolinians and among the best ever in golf. There are many others, but Akshay Bhatia is only 23 years old, already has 2 PGA Tour wins, and back in March of this year, he finished third at the Players' Championship. How do you place him in this universe? Who else comes to mind for you as a North Carolina native when it comes to just the culture of the sport here on our soil and the biggest names that we've sort of contributed to the golf world over the years?
Well, in Masters lore, there's Billy Joe Patton. Billy Joe Patton is from Morganton, North Carolina, and 1954, he was coming down the stretch and should have won the tournament, but he bogeyed the par 5 13th, par 5 15th. He was an amateur now, keep in mind.
Right.
And probably should have won the tournament, finished just out of a playoff between Snead and Hogan. But he was remained an amateur, became a member at Augusta National. He was held in high esteem there just because of his amateur status, his connection with Bobby Jones. So he would fit that bill, I would think. You ask about Akshay, the cool thing about him is, this weekend you've got the Drive, Chip, and Putt Championship on Sunday. He's the first kid that played in that who's played in the Masters.
Oh, cool.
And then last year, of course, he won this week at San Antonio and got in the Masters. So he's really a skilled player and seems like he plays with some freedom. So it'd be interesting to see him get into the mix there because he's fun to watch play. Seems like he talks to everybody and is very loose. So it'd be intriguing to see him do well there.
Ward Clayton is joining us on the David Glenn Show. Of course, this month, the Masters. Next month, we get to serve as hosts of a major again. It's going to be Quail Hollow Golf Club in Charlotte as the host of the 2025 PGA Championship, May 15th to 18th, if you can get there for that. Another friend of the program, John Feinstein, maybe the best-selling American sports author in history, passed away recently, Ward, as you know. Very good friend of our show, a guest probably 100-plus times. He and I shared, among other passions, those for college basketball and for golf. He wrote a Good Walk Spoiled. He wrote the Bruce Edwards golf book, a Flaherty book, a Ryder Cup book, one that was specifically on the majors, if I remember correctly. And I remember reading his stuff in Golf Digest or at their website, maybe occasionally Golf Channel, etc. How do you summarize John's place in that golf world? Because I was asked to summarize John's place in the college basketball world. And he was a fantastic friend, a complicated person. And I, from the outside, know that there were those in golf who loved John and considered him a personal friend, and there were those in golf who would be happy if he didn't show up at all. How do you summarize his kind of contribution to the golf world and his legacy in that area?
He did a pretty good impersonation of Dean Smith and Lefty Driesell too. So
He
that
did.
was awesome.
He did.
John was all about accessibility, and I think a lot of those books, those golf books you cited, and even the book he did on Bobby Knight was based upon having access to people behind the scenes. So he was a master at going to off-season basketball clinics or camps and interfacing with a lot of coaches and late night beer, late night pizza, and gaining their trust. And I think that's one of the things that drew him to golf was the players were largely accessible then. You could develop a relationship with some players, maybe not Tiger Woods or somebody like that, but guys who were sort of in the middle of the pack who knew what was going on. And he really loved the opportunity to meet these guys, talk about their lifestyle, talk about what's going on tour. And that was the sort of the center point of that book, as he took a lot of these, quote, middle of the road guys and built the story upon that. So he was an expert, I've always thought, in developing these relationships from middle of the road players to the top brass. Believe it or not, Fine was a Duke guy, a Duke graduate. Yep. He and Dean Smith generally got along fairly well. And Coach Smith wasn't always the one who was really receptive to talking with the enemy, so to speak. So I think Fine was always great with doing that. It was funny at golf tournaments. He and I would sit around and talk about Duke Carolina basketball and have some of these people with the golf people looking at us like with their head turned sideways because they couldn't understand what we were talking about, but it was cool.
That does not surprise me. I often describe our great state as the center of the college basketball universe for reasons that you would understand and have even written about yourself. But with that kind of broad picture in mind, how do you place the great state of North Carolina in the golf universe, right? Like, I sometimes feel I'm too close. You can't see the forest for the trees. I know how many of my northern friends like to visit Pinehurst. I know how many of them like to visit the coast. There seems to be this flurry where I know we did host other majors in the past, but there's been this flurry where we've gotten to host more than the usual amount in the last couple decades. And I don't have a sense really, other than maybe the Champions Tour golfers that I get to speak to at the SAS Championship in Cary. I don't have a sense of, how they view our state, how they view Pinehurst, how they view Quail Hollow. We do have a couple of PGA Tour regular tournaments every year here, of course, plus the Champions Tour, plus the, what's it now called? Web.com Tour? The On the Rise Tour?
It's called the Corn Ferry Tour.
Yeah, Corn Ferry. Thank you. So that's just a broad way of asking where do we fit as a state in the golf universe?
Well, I think it's a big part of it. And I think a lot of it comes from Pinehurst's relationship with the United States Golf Association. You're going to have U.S. Opens there every 4 or 5 years, but not only U.S. Opens, you're going to have other events that are under the USGA umbrella that are going to come to Pinehurst and play in some of these other golf courses. And I think that's really cool. It's not like you got to hope 10 years down the road you're going to get another U.S. Open. You got one coming right around the corner. And I think that's always cool. I know when I was growing up in Durham, to go to Pinehurst that was a long trip. But now, US One's a super speedway from Raleigh all the way down to Pinehurst. So you can easily get there and back. So it's become accessible for everybody through the state. And plus it's located right in the middle of the state. So if you're in Asheville, if you're in Wilmington, if you're in Charlotte, you can easily, or the Triangle, you can get to Pinehurst pretty easily. So I think a lot of that is, you got a season of winter, but then again, you got 9 months out of the year you can play golf generally.
For sure. And as we let you go, I want you to offer any website or any other information about your books or how to follow your work that would be useful to our viewers and listeners. And also add to that, does anything in particular come to mind as we host the entire golf world later this spring when that PGA Championship does come to Quail Hollow in Charlotte?
Okay, I'll start out with Quail Hollow. Quail Hollow's founder is Johnny Harris. Johnny is the institution in Charlotte. Johnny's also a member of Augusta National. So I think you see a lot of what happens at Quail Hollow with the tweaking of the golf course and making sure it's perfect is based upon Johnny's experience at Augusta National. You see a lot of that every year. Oh, this hole's not right. We don't do something right operationally, and he's going to take that and push that onto Quail Hollow. And I think that's why Quail Hollow's been hosting all these events. So that's really, really important for the Charlotte area and has really been impactful for Charlotte. As far as my work, I would do some work for masters.com. That's started now. So if you're not able to go to Augusta, what our orders are to make people that live in maybe Central Europe or in the middle of the United States who can't go to Augusta, if you go to masters.com, how can you make them feel like they're there? So that could be anything from what's a pimento cheese sandwich taste like to what's the 12th hole like, all the way to, anything and everything like that. As far as the book is concerned, Legendary Caddies is published by Blair Publisher out of Durham. So you can get it at BlairPub, BLAIRPUB.com. It's not a place you go get a cold drink, even though you might like to have a cold drink when you. But Blair did a nice job with the redoing of this book. But hopefully the story of these caddies will live on. And I know some of the caddies there now are inspired by the heritage they have at Augusta National. They're really proud of what's came before them in order to set the bar for their expertise. If you put on that white jumpsuit, you're not doing it just because you can. You got to have some skill behind it to wear that.
Hey, with that in mind, on the way out the door, there's actually a course close to where I live, and I am not the level of golfer of Ward Clayton or anything close to it, but I'm spoiled in that I get invited everywhere. And there is a single course, the only one I've ever experienced that I can think of in our state, that does require you to use their caddy. You explained how for the professionals, obviously the rules changed a long time ago. If you visit Augusta National in a non-professional setting, is there a today's version of that caddy legacy that you've written about? Like, do you get a caddy? Is it automatically required just because you're playing golf there in a non-masters type setting?
You're required to take a caddy when you play there. Yes. And I can tell you, being required to do it is not bad. It's awesome because your experience there, they'll tell you how to play the course more readily. They'll read your putts. They'll be your pal. I'll use an example. Bandon Dunes has become such a humongous place for people to go venture to golf on the Oregon coast. Mike Kaiser, who founded that place, when he started the place, he realized that Dave Glenn and his pals are coming to play there. They're going to play 54 holes. They're going to spend more time with the caddy than they spend with anybody else.
Yeah.
So he made sure that the caddy program was top notch. The caddies were happy. Therefore, their personality seeped out to the people who came and played, and they had an outstanding time. Same thing applies at Pinehurst. Same thing applies if you go to Augusta National. If you go to Pinehurst, you got to get a caddy. It's essential. It's really cool. And the same company oversees the caddy corps at Pinehurst that oversees it at Augusta National.
Huh. Do they still have the media lottery to play Augusta, and has Ward Clayton played it?
Yes, but the media lottery is not like it used to be. It used to be you stood in line in the middle of the night and signed up on a sheet and got to play. Now you put your name in, and there's a lottery that they reveal that A, B, and C got in. So you don't know the process. You used to know the process by your name that was on the wall on a sheet of paper. So there is still a process, and I can tell you, journalists don't get nervous interviewing famous people, but when they go play Augusta National and the money after the Masters, they're in tears. It's unbelievable how scared they are of what's going to happen.
And you got to live that or no?
I did.
Okay.
The day after Nicklaus won, the first time I played, 1986. I could have just walked down the middle of the fairway. I didn't need to hit a shot. I was cool.
How'd you do?
I probably shot 81, something like that.
That's pretty good, man.
A lot of the day was because we had to start on the back nine. So I played amen corner first. So here I am after working all week, traipsing down Amen Corner going, man, this is unbelievable. I didn't care where the ball went.
His name is Ward Clayton. Check out his books and his work at the website, masters.com. It's great to see you, my friend. Keep up the good work, and thanks for the visit as always.
You're welcome. Thanks, Dave. Have a good week.